my growing. In relation to growing them at home, I will tell you something that is rather amusing. I did the ice business, you know, the first balances, and so of course we're learning today we don't do that. Then the second plant I got was this, and this is an ingredient, this one right here. Well, if you can see it on the back side of it, you'll see that one of the spikes or several of the spikes have no foliage. So I said, well, this thing's good. So I put it in the trash can. And so several months later, of course, when the trash can needed to be disposed of, I opened the top and behold, we had leaves and we had roots. So from that, I also have this right here is a baby from that one. So there's no way that you can do anything that is any sillier than what I've done. That's a baby from that. And see, do you see that it's, you see that these spikes right here have no foliage. So just because there's no foliage doesn't mean that you need to put it in the trash can. The other thing that I wanted to tell you is that growing orchids, of course, is an expression to me of God's goodness, but also it brings me a great deal of joy. And it is something that I would encourage you to get involved in. Now, I want us today to also enjoy today, and I want us to laugh, because I read the other day, if you laugh, you use 6 calories. So by the time you get through, I want you to be able to justify chocolate, ice cream, cake, or even a sundae. And I also got some jokes that I'd like to share. I haven't lost my mind. Half of it wandered off and the other half's looking for it. I thought growing old would take longer. And then this is for the Girl Scout cookies, you know, the 4 minutes. How many boxes do I have to eat before I begin seeing results? And then my bed is a magical place where I can automatically remember all those things I should have done. And then I hope this is not going to be what you leave with, but some people should use a glue stick instead of chapstick. So I want you to enjoy today, and we will read on and we will try to impart to you what we have learned.
These are just some of the ABCs. They're awesome, bewitching, colorful. And as we said, the hows and whys.
Okay, growing orchids in your home. Most of us have to begin growing them in our houses, and then we progress to other situations. I've got a glass-in porch with a southern exposure where I grow mine. Now, this is Jim O'Neill, and he's got a wonderful greenhouse situation. He does a lot of mounting. He has a wonderful setup. But most of us don't have that, and a lot of our growers do not. So an eastern facing window in your house is the best place for you to have them. And also the temperature that they need is from 60 to 80 degrees, which generally is what you have in your house. Now, where the orchids grow, well, you're going to just be amazed because they grow everywhere. Of course, they don't grow in glaciers. And they don't grow in the deserts, but there are many native orchids that are in North Carolina in the mountains. And of course, the green swamp has a lot of the orchids. So you might want to take a trip down to the green swamp. So they, of course, they will grow in trees, they grow in soil, and they can grow on rocks, and of course, grow in pots. The other night, Jim was showing us one at our meeting, and I said, well, I think that you could grow them on cinder block. He said, well, they do grow on rocks. And I thought, well, I should have remembered that.
If they grow in trees, they're called epiphytes. If they're in the soil, most of our orchids that we grow are not in the soil, but those that do are called terrestrial. We have those that grow on rocks or lithocytes, and then just the ones in pots, there's different medium that we use.
Now, I want to tell you that they are addictive. And you're not going to have any idea how many ones got so many. I can't tell you how I got so many. One of you asked me, I don't tell you, because they just, of course, it's my fault. You do understand that. But it's addictive enough that you want to have them. And when they bloom, you are just so rewarded. So they're beautiful, and some of them have wonderful scents. I have one that smells like coconut. We have some that bloom that smell like chocolate. And they're just delightful, and they're a whole lot tougher than you think. A lot of people will say, oh, I can't grow them, when you can't.
That's like her trash can orchid. Okay, now these are the orchid parts of the body.
Excuse me, we have something over here.
Okay.
To try to show a little bit better.
Or these are just some of the orchids that they, oh, you've got that over moved, okay, good. We've got Cattleya orchids, which is considered the corsage orchid from years ago. Maybe your mothers used to use them. We also have the moth orchid, which is the phalaenopsis. This is the one that you see most often in the grocery stores, big box stores. And these are the beginner orchids down here. And this is just some examples of some of the different orchids we have with bandages. The Cattleya orchids, oncidiums, and papapedlums, or this rhinopediums.
This is the vanda, and that is also a vanda.
And we'll talk a little bit about plants with pseudobulbs. Would be, this is a pseudobulb, and this is a type of oncidium. This holds the water, it holds nutrients and water. It's a storage for it. This is another example. Here, you see the difference? And then you have some like your phalaenopsis, they don't have pseudobulbs. You just have these big, beautiful leaves. And this is a monopodial type of orchid. So you want to try and keep the leaves on as much as possible. If they start dying and yellowing, then that's okay to go ahead and take it off. But leave them on because that's how they get their nutrients and water intake besides their roots. And there are different types of roots. We've got fat roots, like the phalaenopsis has here. And let me show you a little something. This is plain water. You have bucket. I do have a bucket. This is very much. On phalaenopsis orchids, especially, and on a lot of orchids, you can tell they need watering. Can you see how it's turning green in just that short amount of time?
And I want us to be sure now that we understand the roots that may be coming out of the pot. What is this? I've got 2 or 3 of them about this long, and I can perform it and do that. But that is the ability of the plant See, that's the ability of the plant in nature to adhere to whatever the parent hanging is, you know, the tree, the branch, the whatever. So we don't cut those off, especially with the look of those, they're vellum and they're going to be green. They turn green whenever you water them.
So I'm so sorry to interject. Do you mind speaking a little bit louder? Some people online are having trouble hearing.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
will.
It's hard.
This is a growth tip on this root, and it's a little bit greener. And you can, when we're finished, you can come up and look at these things also.
We hope that we're going to have time at the end to repot this so that you will understand how to do it when you get ready to go home. Work is yours.
Besides the thick root, we have thin roots. These are a little harder to see, but up here they're white and they're very thin. These are more delicate. And as you can see, there's roots growing out of this medium. This needs to be repotted also. There's a lot of my orchids need to be repotted. You want to talk about seed planting?
Yes, you may wind up with a plant that has a leaf that is wrinkled, pleated, or whatever you want to call it here. And you're gonna wonder why that happens. Well, it is either too much water or not enough water. So you can correct that by adhering to, if you haven't been watering it, then of course it needs to be watered regularly. But the wrinkling probably is not going to resolve. So the only way, of course, is to just cut it off, which is no big deal if you need to do that. But that's the reason for it. Okay, do we have one?
We do.
That's in fine.
This one I brought to show because this is a new inflorescence. It's a terminology they use. This is a growing spike. And the buds are they're forming and should be opening probably, I'm not sure, let's say another week. Some of the spikes take a while, it might take a month or two before they'll actually open up. And then some doesn't take quite as long. But it's always exciting when you see those spikes coming up from the leaves and coming up and growing, because you know you're gonna have flowers pretty soon. These are also in spike, and these buds, this orchid here is one that I picked for you all. It's gonna be the drawing at the end of this presentation. I wanted to have one that you can see they're just forming. So this should last you for months. 3 months you'll have a blooming orchid. And it's so much more economical than buying cut flowers for the house. And this is branching. Sometimes they'll just come up with one spike. Other times they'll have two. This one's got 2 spikes, and the spikes themselves are branching out.
Also, we need to tell you too, whenever you have a plant that has bloomed, unless the spike stem looks dead, do not cut it off, because you see, this one is alive, and more than likely you're going to have some new growth coming from it.
You can just see that this node here is beginning to swell. And a lot of times they might go ahead and rebloom on the same stem. Not all of your orchids will do that, but a Phalaenopsis sometimes will. So I haven't cut it down all the way. I thought I would wait and see, and if it re-blooms on that, fine. If it doesn't, then I'll cut it back down closer to the bottom of the orchid. Always cut above the node. That's to help with infection, so you don't get infection into the rest of the plant. And I'll tell you about what to do later about infections and what to do with your plants.
Okay, at this point, we want to talk a little bit about the pots that you have to use. Basically, any kind of pot can be used. I recycle everything, and so that Vanda that's right there, if you'll hold that one up, right there, you know what that is. That is the bottom of a drink bottle. And so we cut it off, and of course, took a drill, and it has got holes in the bottom of it and holes around the sides so that, of course, I can hang it up. And I brought that just to tell you that you can use that. And also, we had a member who uses a semi-hydroponic kind of growing situation, and he used a solo cup. And he's got one hole down here, you see that? And the water accumulates in the bottom of that cup. And then, of course, when you water it, all of the rest of the water comes out that hole, and just the bottom of it has the water in it. And this is hydroponic that he's actually using for that. Any container you can use, but you have got to have drainage. Now, if you want it in a beautiful pot, then have your inner pot to be the one that you can take, that you actually have a plant in, and then you can put it in a prettier pot if you want to do that. So,
Quite often, this is how you will receive them in the stores. You'll get them in a pot like this, and then there's an inner pot. Sometimes you can't see that inner pot, but almost always there is one. And you want to make sure that when you go to water, and we'll talk a little bit more about watering, but when you go to water it, that you take it out to water, or if you water it in the decorative pot, be sure and tip the water out afterwards, so it's not sitting in water.
also, you will notice that you can hardly understand, you can hardly see what her Vanda is in, but that is in a basket. Can you see the little, that basket right there is what this plant is growing in. There is no medium in that basket. And this is how the Vandas grow. It's very strange, but that's how they grow. So, and when they bloom, they are just so beautiful.
And so you do not want to cut here again the roots off. I have one that all the roots are going up instead of down. So this, I was trying to train it to go down. And I have a little bit of the Spanish moss to just kind of help keep some of the humidity around it. Vandas like to have a lot of humidity.
But as you learn, you're going to understand what goes in a regular pot with medium and what you can grow in these, this right here, you're going to say, well, now I would say, okay, how am I going to keep stuff in here? Well, what I do, because they're always falling over, I put rocks in the bottom. That usually they'll tell you to use, there's styrofoam peanuts that are not water soluble. You put them in there, but then I got so many until I'll put it up on the shelf, and then it comes right down behind me, falls on my head. So I put rocks in the bottom of it to stabilize it. And of course, we told you they grow on rocks, so they're happy. But that's how you keep everything in these baskets. But your roots have got to have oxygen and water, and that's the real that whole.
These are different type of net pots, what they call. These are net pots. And this is just your regular garden pot. You can use green ones, black ones, clear ones.
But the clear ones really are the best, because then you can see what kind of root system you've got.
And on this, as you can probably see, I hope, that there are slits in the pot. That's to help get air. Your plastic pots will hold moisture more than your clay pots. So if you have a plant that you want to dry out, you don't necessarily want to keep it in a plastic, or if you do, you want to make sure you have some holes so that they will breathe and dry out a little bit quicker. Now these holes I made myself by using, heating up a big nail or just a wood burning set and just burning the holes into the pot. As Laura said, we like to use anything we have. I have these. I made sure that they were sterilized, and then I just re-drill them.
Let's talk a little bit about the body parts of the orchid, and I think Pam's going to help us with that. And then let's see if I can find like the flowers, which is basically don't let it grow on.
When we talk about the inflorescence, those are your spikes on your orchids. An orchid, the way it's dissected, you've got the sepals here, there's 3 of them. And they're the protector, they're the sheath that goes over the orchid as it's beginning to. On these buds here, you'll see that they all look the same, but when they open, then they'll have the 3 parts, like your head and your legs out here. Then the petals will be like your arms, and then you have your lip. So you've got your sepals, which are 3. You've got your petals. In this case, there are 2 petals, and the 3rd one is the lip. The lip is the decorative one. That's the one where it tries to flirt with different types of insects to come and pollinate. To get pollinated, this is where the insects would go in. Flies, bees, moths.
Okay, let's talk about water. And I have a rain barrel. And I have been using regular rainwater now for quite a while. The pH is normally about 6.5, and I understand that the water system for New Hanover County is also about 6.5. But you can measure your pH and be sure it doesn't need to be, but about 5 to 6 or 6.5. And in this water, of course, we'll talk about fertilization a little bit more, but the water, of course, is where you put your fertilization. Some people use, I have a tiny container that I should have brought you, and you can put your fertilizer in that. And then, of course, you know, it just releases each time you water it. I didn't bring it for you. Different species of orchids have different light requirements. So I was sharing with one of you before we began that after frost is over, I take my plants out. If they're blooming, I keep them on my porch. Now, Jim, you don't put phalaenopsis outside, right?
No.
You put everything.
I like that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I have put phalaenopsis outside, and I actually have a shade area that is covered with shade cloth, and Pam does too. But I take them outside after frost, and I hang them on shepherd's hooks in baskets, and or in tree limbs or whatever. But you have to do enough research with your plants to be sure of what kind of shade they need, because they are sensitive. Phalaenopsis will absolutely get sunburned, and of course, then the leaves are going to turn black, and you'll have to cut them off. So light is very important. The temperature that you have for your plants are important, because in order for phalaenopsis to bloom and every other orchid to bloom, they've got to have so many days of temperature change. And basically your in-house orchids need to have a temperature change of 10 degrees at night, So if it is, if you keep it at 75, then at night it needs to be 65. And generally you can leave your plants out until it gets a lot colder than you think they could survive, but I get nervous. I can't do that. So generally when it gets to be about 55 outside, I take all of them into the porch. But we phalaenopsis have to have at least 10 days of about 60 degrees. And the growers will tell you that those phalaenopsis that are coming in from Taiwan are normally put in chillers for about 10 days. And then when they're taken out, they will then spike as they're on their trip across the ocean to sell to us. So remember this, and your cattleyas can have.
To get back to the water a little bit, most of you have seen just add ice orchids. That was a very good marketing issue, not gimmick, but an idea that came up. So people wouldn't overwater their orchids. Because they come in, you get them at the store, you water them, you put them in the pot. Sometimes there's moss around them. So you put them in the pot, you just go, oh, I'm gonna add some water, fine, no problem. You come back, in a couple of days or a week later, and let me add a little more water. But what you don't realize, this is why I say you need to check, is that water is sitting in the bottom of the pot. So you wanna always make sure and check. The reason why they came up with the ice was so you wouldn't overwater. So you just put an ice cube in and just let the water just trickles down. The only thing is, as we said before, most orchids, almost all orchids, are from the tropics, are from warm area. They've never seen ice. They don't want ice. It's recommended that you use tepid water on your orchids, not cold water. If you want to make sure you don't overwater it and you want to use ice cubes, set the ice cubes out in a jar and let them melt and then water your orchids with it. But make sure that you always let them drain. I like to let mine sit in. If I have a decorative container and I'm in a hurry because I've got about 90 orchids, I'll go ahead and water them in the container. Wait about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Come back with one of my trusty little buckets and then just pour the extra water in there. So I'm not having to take them back and forth to the sink. The ones that are in baskets, they do have to go back and forth to the sink. But that's one way to save a little bit of time. You just want to make sure that you're not letting them sit in water.
We had a speaker who is a commercial grower, and he said that one of the reasons why the ice was suggested is that if you use it, it will kill your orchid faster and you'll have to buy it.
Method to the madness on that.
Just keep that in mind. So at any rate.
And also the frequency, how often do you water? It depends on your growing medium that you have. And also the type of orchid you have. The ones, we're doing mostly general for the phalaenopsis orchid, because that's what most people have. But you can tell, as we mentioned, about the roots. And that's why if you look, these are still green. And I don't know if you can see them there. But the roots are still green in this. So this doesn't need to be watered at this time. This is also grown in pure sphagnum moss. This is not loose, this is a brick of it, but it loosens up. It retains water, so you don't have to water them as often. You can just check by looking to check your roots. And if you can't check them because they're grown in something dark, you can also put your finger in and feel down like you would on a house plant. Feel if it's damp down there, because sometimes it might look dry on top, but it's damp inside. Hold off a little bit. Most of them do not like to be overwatered.
Okay, yeah. All right, and we've talked a little bit about temperature. Now, I don't think in our growing environment, we have to worry about humidity. But, they love humidity, so we should just be wonderfully growing orchids because we don't usually have the problem with humidity, but if you grow them inside, you might need to be, cognitive of that. And you can have a, rock and tray kind of thing like
This
that.
is just an example. This is a humidity tray that I would use for a small plant. I put little gravel in there. And then I can fill that with water to the top of the gravel. And then set my plant in it. Not where it's sitting in the water, but where it's just sitting on top. You can use larger trays. I use a lot of these little plastic trays. Besides to protect everything, but also in case water is dripping, it'll hold the water and I can empty it later. You can use larger ones. I've got boot trays that you'll see, Sam's Club or wherever you want to get them. They're those big boot trays that are plastic. And I will put my orchids in one of those plastic trays on top of the boot tray, and then I'll put some water in the bottom of the boot tray so it brings up the humidity. Another way for humidity is you have a place in the kitchen where the water is always being turned on, or in your bathroom. It's a little more humid that way.
Okay, and be sure that you have moving air, either if you've got them inside, you need to have some kind of a fan kind of situation on them because the moving air of this is very big vital. Even a ceiling fan will solve that problem.
With that fan and with the air movement, they like air movement. Most of your orchids, or a lot of your orchids, are grown in the canopies, and there's always wind, right? They're grown outside. There's always wind blowing. And that helps to have them, the leaves dry off when it rains. So they're not sitting in water or they're not getting mildew on that. But you don't want to have them underneath, I'm looking for a vent. You don't want them underneath one of your heating or air conditioning vents because they don't like that type of draft. They like the wind. I've got fans just blowing on mine. And if you have a greenhouse or an enclosed space, it's very important to have a fan blowing on it.
Okay, I think we've really covered the water situation. Of course, the hotter it gets, the more you have to water. But now mine are outside and we've got an irrigation system and it usually is on about twice a week. So I don't have to water them. But we also need to make you aware that your phalaenopsis grow generally like this. You know, here's the tree, they grow like this because water needs to repel from, they cannot have water in the crown of the plant because it will cause it to rot. So you always water the bottom of the plant. And
The planting medium. Now it can be called media or medium, doesn't matter.
but
They use
when I'm
interchangeable.
talking about, it's this crown that we're talking about, the center part of the plant. And I know that with us talking about the watering and all of this, I do want to tell you why I brought that cataseum because
Let me talk about
you're
this.
going to
Okay. As Laura mentioned, in situ, phalaenopsis and a lot of the orchids will grow at an angle, they grow down. We in our homes like them upright. So just make sure if you get water in the crown that you actually blot it out. This is another what I wanted to show you. These orchids, now this is the Vanda orchid, which because of the roots and there's no potting mixed, they like to be wet. And during the summer, sometimes you have to water them twice a day. I have mine hanging outside under a shade cloth and I'll water them twice a day, only when it's really, really hot. And then when I bring them in the house because of the weather, I don't leave them out when it's real cold. I bring them in when it's about 55 degrees, and I'll take them to the bathroom, and I hung a shower rod in the center of the bathtub, and I hang them there, put all the plants that are hanging that need to be watered. I just turn the shower on and let the shower water them. But as you can see, I don't want to get water all over their floors, how they've turned green. So you can tell that it's picked up the water. Can you all see back there? And on the Vandas, you want to make sure that they turn green before you stop watering them. Sometimes I'll go back, I'll water once and then come back and water them again. And that's just with the garden hose, because I don't have a rain barrel, but one of these days I will, and then I'll water with rainwater. That's much better.
If when you do your potting, you will remember if you have rocks in the bottom of it, you're gonna say, well, gosh, that's heavy. But normally the pot is light, and when it's light, you know that you're gonna have to water it.
Yeah, that was another way of telling you.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about the light.
Yeah, and a little bit more in detail. You've got your natural light, or here you've got your man-made light. That's fine. They like it either way. You can put your plants on the windowsill. Usually the best windowsill is an east facing. If it's west, sometimes it gets too much light. So you put some kind of either the mini blinds or a sheer curtain, so it blocks some of the sun from coming in. The intensity, and you wonder, well, my orchid, how much light does it really need? Your Phalaenopsis doesn't need as much as the other orchids, some of the other orchids that you see up here. But you can tell by holding your hand over a light. Can you see my shadow? Okay, you can bring it up a little bit, and as it goes, it gets a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter. So high intensity orchids, your Cattleya orchids, your Vanda orchids, they like a lot of light. So you want to make sure that you have a definite hand that you can see that they are getting that light. Also, if you put them in the windowsill, you don't want them touching the glass, because that glass can get too hot. And it might feel fine in your house, but you get close, you start feeling the leaves of that plant, and they might be real warm, so you can get sunburns. You want to make sure that you don't have them too close to the window, and that if it's high, intense light, that you shade it some.
Now, on my porch, I have fluorescent 3 feet from
Shot lights.
shop lights, yes. And we have them on a rotating basis, and it normally, I try to have about 12 hours of time. It's on the timer. Now, there are grow lights, there are various lights that will give you different intensities, but for me, I'm not growing for, the show, and so I'm growing to get them to rebloom. So you can use fluorescent shot lights.
And again, you've heard us talk about outside. They love to be outside. If you have a tree, people will grow them in your oak trees. They'll put them in the crotch of the tree. And I just got back from Florida, and I've got friends down there that have their orchids growing that way, just in the wild, just outside. But that's Florida. We can't do that here. So you can bring them in and out. Put them outside, shaded, dappled light is the best for them. We talked some already about the temperature at 65 to 80 degrees is what they like. Most our orchids. 10 degrees less at night, especially seasonally, to get your Phalaenopsis to bloom. A 10 degree to 15 degree temperature variance between 10 to 15 days in a row from night to day will help stimulate spiking. And these are just some of the places with the humidity and air.
Yeah, it's really important when we are working with our plants that we are very careful about sanitation. Because, believe it or not, you can do a lot of damage to your plants if you're not careful. So when you do your repotting, when you have to cut, or when you have to do any separating, you must be careful that you use good sanitation.
So cutting shears, I keep this on my counter. I keep it closed, but I have it on my counter. So whenever I'm cutting, because I'll do it all the time, I'll just cut some roots or cut some leaves, and I just stick them back in here, let them sit for 10, 15 minutes. I might leave them for an hour or so till I get back to them. But that's one way of sanitizing your tools. Also, you can use a torch or a flame. I just brought this. And you run your, this will flame a little bit. It won't do too much. You just run it, and I make sure I get the tips all the way down, that I get that hot. Now I've got a little torch at home I use, but this is another way to help sterilize it. Oh, wait a minute. I won't stick it in there yet. We are. Oh, I'm sorry. This is 70% alcohol. Just your regular rubbing alcohol. So just 70%. That usually, they say that works better than the 90 or 91%. Also, when you're potting, when you're doing a lot, if you just have a couple of orchids and you keep your hands, you're fine. You're not transferring. But if one orchid has got some kind of disease, then if you use the same cutting utensils, then you can spread it. Viruses spread really easy. So that's why when people have a lot of orchids and they're dealing with orchids, that they go ahead and just sanitize their cutting. Wash your hands before and after. I don't go normally just touching my leaves and running my hands over them and going to another orchid and feeling the same thing without having to clean my hands. We haven't talked yet about some of the fertilizing, the care, anything else. You just clean them up, and I'll show you on that one if we have time. That's why I want to kind of hurry through some of this. We'll show you about repotting it, and I'll cut the spike and some of the other things we use.
James's plant over there, why don't we cut off those leaves, the ends of the leaves that are of concern, and talk about using.
Okay,
cinnamon.
these have been sterilized. I'm going to cut them at an angle below the dead part. I like to go about an inch below. Oops.
Now, you may wonder why this happened. Well, I do too, so I don't know why it happened. But generally, it can be a variety of things, but.
Too much fertilizer, too much water. Okay, I've cut those off. I'm sticking these back down in here. And I'm going to set this here so you can see it. When we cut things, it can be a stem, it can be the leaf. We'll use some cinnamon to put on the cut, just regular cinnamon to put on the cut. Don't want to get the cinnamon really on your roots because the cinnamon is drying. But if you put just a little bit of cinnamon on the cut here, well, these are all from the same plant. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some cinnamon on my hand.
Use a little paintbrush. You can put your cinnamon in a container, and then you can use a paintbrush to paint it on the end of the leaf.
Because it's still wet. It's a fresh cut, so it's still wet. And so it kind of just puts the cinnamon right there, and that'll help seal it. Let's do some on this one too. Okay.
And see, the advantage is it smells wonderful. You can just go out and it smells wonderful.
Okay. When you are repotting or you get a new orchid in, you can go through and spray it. This is a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. It comes in a spray bottle. You can spray now. And actually, I could have sprayed it first before I put the cinnamon on. And then this will dry it. You'll see if you have it, it's fizzing. This particular one is not doing any fizzing, but this will help. It actually helps kill some of the bugs. Like when I repot and I pull it out of the pot, I'll spray all my roots and the axis down here, I'll spray that with hydrogen peroxide.
But be sure now that you keep it in the original bottle because you know it is not effective if you don't. So the best thing to do is if you have an area that you keep your chemicals and stuff, keep it in there.
You don't want it in a light see-through bottle. Peroxide does go bad. First time I heard that, I go, you gotta be kidding. I never realized that. But I keep that under the sink and I keep it in a dark bottle.
Also, it is said that hydrogen peroxide is good for bacterial infections. So, you know, bacterial or fungal infections are two things that, I mean, I know that Jim knows more about it and decided that it's very difficult to determine whether it's, you always have to test for it. So, and of course, now we talked about those critters that we would rather not have. Of course, it's wonderful when you have the little green tree frogs. It's wonderful when you have the owls because they will eat the bug. But I don't know why they don't ever want to live on my porch. I don't understand it. I, you know, put out the welcome sign and after all sorts of stuff, and they never stay. So these pests, the mealybugs and the aphids, the scale, and the spider mites are four things that really give us a fit.
They're easy to control on some of them. If you have mealybugs, they're that white, like a piece of cotton. You take a little bit of Q-tip and some alcohol in the end and just dip it off. You just kind of hit them. You don't have to use a strong insecticide to get rid of the mealybugs. But you do want to make sure that you get them where they're hiding down in there. Another thing that I like to use is it's 50% water, 50% alcohol, 1 teaspoon of Dawn and 1 teaspoon of an oil. And this is a little mix that I keep, and I just spray my plants down if I think I have any kind of bugs on them, just to go through and spray it. The alcohol dries right away. Dawn helps it to disperse into the different parts of the orchid, and then the oil gives it a little bit of, well, besides the sheen, it just kind of helps it stay there. And this is something you can make, and it's really good for spraying on orchids. If you think you've got some bugs, you don't have to use anything chemical. They are, if you have an infestation, you can't get rid of them. There are things to use, and there's nothing, you know, wrong. We just try not to use it. There's fungicides. This actually says it's a fungicide, insecticide, and a miticide. Spider mites are always hard to get rid of. So you need to make sure you have a miticide for that. Another one is the roses insect killer. If you're spraying outside, be sure to watch out for your the bees. You want to make sure that what you have won't kill the bees also. Those are so important to what we do nowadays. Another thing to use is neem. This is a real heavy oil, and it will help suffocate bugs and diseases. And just follow the directions on the box.
And be sure each time you buy a new container of whatever, that you look at the ingredients. Because unfortunately, the manufacturers will change the ingredients, but they will not change the bottle, the bag, or whatever. So be sure that you look at it and be sure of what you want to actually get.
One thing that outside you need to watch for sunburn. If the leaves are yellow, it's not always that bad. So your leaves will yellow because they're getting older. If you have a lot of the leaves yellowing, you need to check your roots. Take it out of the pot and check to see if you have any roots. Because sometimes you'll find out you don't have any roots in the pot. That it's just trying to grow and it can't because there's no roots. So you gotta take it out and you can put them, there's different ways to try and get your orchid to reroot. It's like any of your regular plant. You can put them in a little bit of sphagnum moss, cut off we'll go through that in just a minute. Wilted leaves and wrinkling leaves. Here again, a lot of times people think that a wrinkled leaf means that it's needs more water and you'll water it more. And sometimes it's because you've had too much water. Okay. Purchasing. One thing I wanted to go before we actually go through with purchasing, I just wanted to show you some examples of potting, the things that we use. There is gravel you can put in the bottom to help add weight to your lightweight packages. Hydrotone, we showed you the one plant over there that was grown semi-hydroponic, grown in hydrotone, and this is clay pellets. And some growers will actually put some clay pellets in their mix, their potting mix. There's lava rocks. These are good for some Cattleya orchids. We have just regular bark, and there's different sizes of bark. Sphagnum moss, you want to get a good quality sphagnum moss. And on those sheets that I handed out to you or that you guys picked up, in the back there are some places where you can actually purchase orchid supplies, orchids, websites to go to, or YouTube sites to learn some more information. Now this is just a block of sphagnum moss. It needs to be reconstituted, so it'll come out. Some other things that growers use, oyster shells. And that's to add some calcium. There's also Epsom salts. Laura likes to do this once. How often do you do this?
Yeah, let me just tell you this. We haven't talked a great deal about watering, but in the vein of this, I use this stuff right here. It is, where is he? Sunset Ridge?
No.
Oak Island.
Oak Island.
This is wonderful stuff. You could put it on that chair and it probably would sprout.
It's called Kelp Math. It's formulated by Ray Bartolo at First Rays in Oak Island. And you can purchase this online. You can also go to his website, First Rays.
But anyway, I always use, the growers will tell you to fertilize weekly, W-E-A-K. So I usually use about a quarter of a teaspoon in a gallon of water. And 1 week I'll use nothing but rainwater, which washes out any of the salts that are remaining. I will use the kelp max 1 week. And of course, Pam has read that I'm using entirely too much Epsom salt, so maybe I am. But to any degree, I use like a teaspoon of this once a week. Now, these are on a rotation, you understand. You know, I've got 1 week that it's like a quarter of a teaspoon per gallon of regular orchid fertilizer. And then the next week, it is the kelp. And then the next week, it is the Epsom salts. And then last week, it is just plain water. So I have lost very few plants. Now, I've had some that have died, but in general, this has worked for me. So every speaker we have will say to you, this is what I do. So if it works, great. If it doesn't, of course, don't do it anymore. So, but that's what I have done.
Also, another thing with the Epsom salts, if your plants are really a light yellow, they're just not looking right, you can do them a little dose of Epsom salts, and that might help bring them up a little bit. These are some other things that are used to enhance or go along with some of your potting material. This is sponge rock. There's different sizes you can get for sponge rock. Charcoal. I have two different sizes of charcoal here. One is really big and one is smaller.
Now, this charcoal is a flat charcoal. And it's best for you to understand what you need, because it's not the briquettes that you're going to put in your grill. So I asked husband to go and get a bag of this charcoal, and I talk about it and all this kind of stuff. He comes home, of course, with this bag this high, which I can't even lift, and it is all this flat stuff. And I said, well, I don't think this is what I need. He said, well, this is all that they had. Well, lo and behold, it was what I needed, but we had to go out and hammer it and wound up with this. So if you don't want to be aggravated, you find some of this in the orchid supplier, because buying that.
You can find them at the big box stores here, or if you go to Farmer Supply, they usually have a bag of sponge rock or a bag of charcoal. Now these were the peanuts we were talking about. You can even break these up a little bit and put them in your mix just to give more air. We talked about air in your mix. Orchids like to have air around their roots. You can put a little bit of these in there. This is cedar mulch that they use. This particular kind has got the sponge rock in it. It's got a mixture of sponge rock and cedar. People down at Carter and Homes in South Carolina, they like to use a lot of the cypress mix. And then this is just another example of orchid bark. And I won't go into the whole thing about Orchiata as a really good New Zealand bark, but that can be ordered online. It seems to work better than the orchid mixes. But if you only have a few orchids, and if you want to just go out and get something so you can do it really quick and not have all this stuff, buy a bag of just your orchid mix. And you can use, this was good for just about any type of orchids. And it's got the bark, it's got perlite, and sometimes it even has the charcoal in it.
What's the charcoal used for?
It sweetens up the mix. The mixes start getting sour. Jim, what else does the charcoal?
Well, it keeps it a little bit acid. You really don't have to have the charcoal. It's, it comes in a nice form and it's good. I mean, but as you say, the Orchiata, I think our club has just started using Orchiata. It's very expensive, but if you, if you don't buy a lot of orchids, which is not a given, but you can just buy a bag of Orchiata and use that, and you don't have to use anything else.
As he has a group of orchids coming in from Hawaii.
But I'm not going to grow them in anything. I'm going to grow them on a branch, a cedar branch, which is another thing. It's a whole
Jim does a lot of bounty, and he is excellent at that.
They don't need any of that stuff. In nature, they grow maybe in a little bit of leaf mold. You used to be able to buy leaf mold, and can't buy it anymore for some reason. But that's about all they ever get in nature. It's just a little leaf mold.
Yeah, Jim has a wonderful setup in his greenhouse, and he will mount most everything. And so this is tree fern. This is a slab of tree fern. And we were given this plant when Orchid Trail went out of business. And so if you can see it, all of you have a magnifying glass, if you can see this plant right up here, then I told you. And so Pam said, here, see if you can take care of this. So I said, nobody's gonna want any of it if you don't do something to it. So I took, this is butterfellum and a branch, and so I had to figure this down here. But this is what Jim's talking about, the mounting, and he's got some beautiful things that are mounted. I don't do mounting because I don't have an automatic watering system, and you do have to water more. And I know you wonder, what in the world is that thing? And I actually had the same question when I went to a grower today and he had all these sticks. And I thought, who in the world is this thing? Well, guess what? This is a calcium and it has not been watered since about November. And you're thinking, why does she want that thing? Well, you see, I've got new growth here. And of course, the rule is that you don't water it until the growth is about 4 to 6 inches. And also you see new roots. Well, I don't ever see any new roots actually, or maybe I can't recognize them. But at any rate, the reason I want this is because it is absolutely beautiful when it blooms. We've got one member her name is Laura Elliott, and she has the most beautiful blooms you've ever seen. I mean, they're just, like this. Now, this Laura has not had that luck, I'll tell you that. But I'm not going to throw it away. Maybe I need to put the trash can. Maybe that's it. But I do want to tell you that, see, this is fascinating. When you have a stick like this and you nurture it and then it blooms, what could be more rewarding than that? So I just wanted to bring this to you to let you see that even a stick can bloom. And I'm depending on the steward. See, with me bringing it to you, I'm going to tell it that it has to not let me down.
I'm going to, because I know we're getting short on time, I'm going to really quickly repot this plant. This one does have a name. A lot of the orchids you get in the stores do not have orchid tags on them. This one does. I ordered it from California, Norman's Orchids, and it's a beautiful white, flat Phalaenopsis orchid that has a big lip. And I have a picture I'll show you in a minute. But real quickly, my mix is still a little bit wet, which is good. So I'm trying to get it out of the pot. I'm gently pulling it out of the pot that it came in. This is the grower's pot. And you want to try and tease all of this sphagnum moss off of it. As you can see, I know you guys have got that pole, it makes it hard. The roots are all around the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to try and pull this out. Is there any questions while I do this? Because this will take a few moments. Any questions that we can answer for? Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about the pH being about 6.5. What?
6.5.
So they really need to be barely acidic. Is that what you're saying?
6.57.
And the rain around here is acid, so
Yeah.
I think that's one reason they really love being out in the summer, is getting that rain. And I had one of our real experts years ago tell me that my orchids probably wouldn't be growing at all if I didn't have them out in the summer, because the water, I was watering with well water that had all kinds of salts in it. I mean, the water around here does way more than orchids really like. And the only reason your orchids are growing at all is you got them out in the summer. And the rainwater washes all those salts out of the roots. It's really good to flush your work if you're growing in a pot. Of course, if you're growing in a mat, they get flushed all the time. Every time you water them, they're flushed. But it's really good to get them really flushed out at least once a month, wouldn't you say, Adam?
Yeah, I do.
Because you don't want the fertilizers to accumulate in there. I mean, the fertilizer is kind of like a lot of things. Salt is great, you can't live without it, but try eating a pound of salt every day, see what it does to you. Orchids are the same way, you know, there's moderation.
You could also have a bucket of rainwater and kind of like soak it a little bit.
The soaking is very good. That's one of the things that really works well with Phalaenopsis is in trying to rejuvenate one that's just not doing well, is to let it soak. Actually, and I have read other people do this too. I'm not sure it would be a great common recommendation, but I've often left them in the water overnight. I just read something about rejuvenating Phalaenopsis that are really pretty far gone. He basically left them in water for like 24 hours and then left them out of water for 24 hours. He went through a long process, which I'm not usually up for. But
I've seen that, I've heard that too. And actually, I have had some pots and plants that have rejuvenated that way. Okay, I'm getting down to where most of it, there was not a plug in here. What sometimes the growers will have a little plug, sometimes it's just like a sponge, and they have seedlings, a little seedling plug, and they'll just put it right in a pot and then just put medium around it. So I've got most of it out, not all of it. And on here, got a whole tangle of, normally I would take it to the faucet and then just rinse it really good with a sprayer on the faucet to get out the rest of the bits and pieces. But you want to check your roots. This is what we were talking about, how roots are important. And on Phalaenopsis and other orchids, you can tell if they're rotted. Okay, I'm going to cut off any of these black roots. If they're soft, if they're squishy, not here, it's just a black root and it's kind of dry. I'm just going to cut that off. Sometimes you'll see them black at the top, but they won't, but they'll be okay at the bottom. This orchid has got enough roots. I'm not worried about cutting off any of those. So I will cut off any of the ones that look like they're soft. And this is vellum on the outside of the orchid. The actual root, I can show you guys, I don't know if you can see this or not. On this orchid here, there's an inside string. That actually is the root. This is just vellum. And a lot of times it'll just pull off. It's not quite gonna pull off on that, but a lot of times it'll just pull off real easy. So I'm gonna cut that off. Now, if I've had an orchid and I'm trying to repot it and it doesn't have any roots, but yet I can still keep this type of root on it, the inner core, I'll keep it because I'll help to stabilize it.
Is it okay to repot them while they're blooming or wait?
You should wait. Yeah, that's a good question. You should wait. It sets them back a lot of times. So you don't want to, I'm not going to cut a whole lot of roots off on this.
I've had a number of questions. How do you know what size pot to use when repotting?
You want to go a little bit bigger. You don't want to over pot because that throws your watering off. And a lot of orchids like to be a little bit root bound, especially your dendrobium orchids. So if you put it in too big of a pot, it's not going to like that. So I just tried my pot on this one was smaller, but you see how many roots I have. So with this, I have a lot of roots to get in that little pot. I'm going to put it in this one. Possibly I could have gone a little bit bigger, but I didn't bring one with me, and I think it'll be fine. So now I'm going to spray it with my hydrogen peroxide. And again, usually I rinse it off first at the sink. Okay, I'm not getting any fizzing on this at all. And normally I don't want to put this on. You can let it dry a little bit. I just sprayed it and I cut part of the bottom of the stem of the actual growth, the axis of the orchid off because it was longer than what's needed to be. And I have all my roots at the top. So I went ahead and sprayed that and cut that little piece off. At home, a lot of times I'll let that sit and dry first. And then maybe make it really careful, just put a little bit of cinnamon where it doesn't get to the rest of the roots, just on that one part. Can you guys see?
No, we can't see that. I've never even seen that part that you're talking about. Can we see?
Yeah, you're welcome to. Okay, right, this part right here.
Okay. You cut
I
some
just
off?
I cut just a little bit of that off because the roots were dead down there and it probably, so
There
it's
was no use to it.
right. Sometimes they get really big. So I'm gonna put just a little bit of this cinnamon on it. If you're gonna leave me, I will do the drawing.
I got Mike gonna feed the meter.
Oh, are you coming back?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little bit of,
Pam, I'm sorry, can you point that out to the camera?
yes.
See, yeah.
Let's see if we can get that in here. It's just right here. It's hard to see, but it's where dead roots were down at the bottom. And on some of the orchids, you'll have they've lost a lot of roots and they have a big stem down at the bottom. You don't need that. So you cut it off, you let it dry before you repot it, but I'm not going to in this instance, but let it dry first. Put a little cinnamon on it. And that's just to help keep any kind of disease growing on it. Okay, so I like to use in the bottom of my pots, I like to use a little bit of damp sphagnum moss. And I'm putting this at the bottom. It's also, if you have bigger holes at the bottom, your bark might fall through. It just kind of helps keep it where the bark doesn't fall through. Then I've got I've used a medium grade or medium size orchid bark. It was Orchiata, it's called Power. And I'm sprinkling some of this in the bottom. I don't want to get too much because I want to get these roots in. I'm keeping out the air roots. Lure my air roots on that. Out there. Keep looking, you keep seeing more that are. Sometimes people, when they finish, you only have a couple of roots left. That's okay. Make sure that they're healthier roots. Okay, I'm putting this in because this is going to be growing upright. I'm not having it, I'm not slanting it. Okay. I can center it in the pot. If you've got one that travels, Laura, can you show them like this over here, right here? It doesn't come out of the pot anymore.
Oh, it doesn't.
No.
Okay, it has affixed itself to the edge.
Flip it over, yeah, and show them
See-
inside.
See, it has, now affixed it to the pot. And, ideally, you would want to do something with it before it did that, which has been designed. Probably get it off the pot.
Yeah, I have some in some decorative pots that really liked it, and I didn't repot it. So it was growing all down the side of the decorative pot.
Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to take a hammer and completely break the pot in order to get the roots off. And of course, this cheapness here tries for this to soak them, so that if you will soak them, they normally will let go of the fire.
My question is, so basically, the medium that you're using isn't really giving them any nutrients. It's only a structure that you've got. That's all that you're giving them. is a
Very good.
structure.
Yes, ma'am, it is. That's exactly what it is.
And in normal plants, my mother would always say, you cannot put a 10-cent plant, she was talking about a 10-cent hole, put a $25 plant in a 10-cent hole. And what we normally do is we enrich our pot, our plants when we get ready to plant them. And of course, there are requirements that we need to use for the various plants, but you're right, they basically are not benefiting too much from the medium.
Now, we brought only a care sheet for the Phalaenopsis orchid. But if you go to AOS.org, American Orchid Society, they have care sheets on there. They have a lot of information that you, as a beginner, if you're not a member, you can still get on and look at some videos. Once a month, they have an excellent video, a webinar from Ron Manhattan. And he's their education director. He's in charge of education for the American Orchid Society. And it is called Greenhouse Chat. You can get on that and watch it yourself. You don't have to be a member. You sign up ahead of time.
Okay, now Pam.
Yep.
If we want those air roots that you've left out, if we want to put them in the pot, do we put them in the pot or do we not?
I've been told you can, but some people say, yes, you can just go ahead and put them in. And if you don't have any other roots, put them in the pot. But these are accustomed to the air, whereas the ones, even though they're the same type of root, the ones inside the medium are used to being grown in the medium. And this is used to the air. I like to leave mine out. But if you have to, if that's the only other thing you could do, then by all means, put them in.
I have one more question about the temperature. So you're talking about within a 24-hour period, you should have 10 or 15 degrees difference in order to promote blooming.
Yes.
Not just taking it from an 80 degrees and putting it in a 50 degrees. It's that overnight thing.
Correct.
When we have our houses stay at 72. Generally, that's not gonna work.
Well, some people have no problem doing it. I usually lower mine down at night, the house temperature, just because I sleep better. And people have Phalaenopsis without that temperature change, and they still will bloom.
I have mine on a baker's rack in my kitchen in front of 2 windows. They're under a vent, and I don't change nothing about it.
And they grow and they bloom.
They're gorgeous. And in the summertime, last summer was the first time I took them outside in spring. I left them out there the whole summer. And I have a back porch that gets about 2 hours of shade. And you would have thought I sprinkled gold on it. I mean, it sounds a lot involved, but don't be intimidated by it. Because I never thought I could grow it. It was my porch.
So is your window east?
That I don't know. But It's a lot, it's very warm there.
You can grow in a higher light window. West is probably the worst. But if you put a sheer curtain between the plants, you can cut white. It's a lot easier to cut the white than it is to add it. I have the other problem. I have trees everywhere and I just value every little sunbeam. But east light is like gold. I mean, it is one of the best lights in general for plants.
What's the average rebloom time for that particular variety?
Sometimes they'll do it twice a year, usually only once a year. Now, you might have seen me tapping and moving, and I'm trying to get it filled up in here. Now, I made that mix last night, and it's orchiata with some perlite added in. And I put a layer of orchiata on top, just because as you water, your perlite starts looking ugly. It gets brown. So if you have a layer of bark on top, you don't notice it. So this is just a bottle with a little hole in it. And I'm just going to go ahead and wet it. As Jim said, we've been using orchiata. It's a brand name that comes in and from New Zealand. You don't pre-soak it because it has a special coating on it.
It also lasts a long time. One of the reasons that you have to repot is this pine bark will rot, and it'll usually rot fairly fast. And then when it rots, you have to repot. I mean, you don't have to worry about anything else. If medium is rotted, you've got to get it out of there. And the orchiata, well, they commercially claim that it'll last 10 years. I believe that when I see it, but
Yeah,
it's going to last longer. The roots are going to be the reason you repot if you use orchiata, probably. And if you use these clay things, obviously these clay things they don't rot either. So
no, but you have to sterilize them in between use.
How do you sterilize a pot?
Depending on the pot, I soak mine in bleach. A bleach water, 10% bleach to water. And I just soak them. I leave them in for about 24 hours. I don't know the actual amount of time. It's like I'm not sure, and I need to find out how long you're supposed to really flame your cutting tools. I don't get mine red hot, but I get them hot. And okay, now this is potted. I have a few spots that don't have water in it, but okay. So I'm going to put the tag back in here. I like to mark on here that I have the date that I repotted it.
I don't think we've overemphasized the fact that you do need to keep your tags, your name identifiers. But I do want to encourage every one of you to be part of us. You have heard from Jim. He's like a mini encyclopedia, which of course many of you are too young to know what that is. But let's say he's the internet. He's a Wikipedia. That's the word I need, right?
Yeah.
So, and I've never asked him a question that he didn't say, oh, you're so.
whether I knew the answer or not.
But we have several members who are very knowledgeable of growing orchids, and they will share with you any question that, they will answer you with anything. And if they don't know, they will tell you they don't know. But generally they will know. So when we have a meeting and it's in person, which we hope to resume in May, it's at the Arboretum in their conference area and educational center. And members bring their plants that are blooming, and we have a show table, and we also have a raffle table. So that's how you wind up with
More plants.
getting more plants because for some reason you win them and you can't have to take them home. So,
I decided to go ahead and keep this stem on because I had said it's not dead. And there's a little bit of swelling on that top, so maybe it'll bloom again. I'll leave this, well, I'll put it up here. Feel free to, let's see if it'll come out. Usually, if you pack them in there enough, you can lift them out. So I've tapped it down so there's no air gaps in there. I put the tag in, I marked on the tag that I repotted it today. I'll set this here. I've got my stake. You've got little clips you can put there to keep them open.
yeah, you do know that is like your children's ponytail, your hair decorations, that's what that is.
And you'll start getting a whole collection of clips. But, and I don't know, let me pull this over there. This is the type of Phalaenopsis. And it's white, but that lip is not your normal lip on a Phalaenopsis, because a lot of those will curve up a little bit. This one's flat. And I believe it's what they also call the big lip. And this will be up there so you guys can see. Any other questions? Because I think it's time to,
I have a couple from our online audience.
all right.
Can you tell us more about the container that releases fertilize as you water and where to purchase those?
Oh,
If
Google it.
yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, they're self-watering containers. And I do Kelly's Corner, KELLY KORNER, out of Pennsylvania, I believe. They might sell them. And then there's also repotme.com. I have those on your sheets here, but it's REPOTME.com. And they have some self-watering pots. You would mix up the fertilizer and put it in there, but I don't usually do that. I don't have any of those. Any other questions?
How often can you think to repot, or can you expect to repot?
Usually you should repot it once a year, about 2 years. It depends on what you, here again, some of it depends on what you have. I use Orchiata. Orchiata lasts longer. The only sphagnum moss really that I have in there is at the bottom. The sphagnum moss breaks down, but the Orchiata will last longer. So I would go 2 years probably on that. And my, as you can see, this poor baby. Oh, this is an Oncidium. It needs to be repotted. This is just, well, there's something in the bottom of it. I can hear it crunching, so it sounds like it's got sponge rot. But it's moss at the top and a lot of roots. So usually once a year. They like to have fresh media.
Okay, now Pam,
Yeah.
also tell everyone about the division of that. Are you gonna divide it or are
No.
you just gonna put it in another
No.
pot?
No, you could divide. You can see where the new growth is because it grows, it blooms on the new growth. I like to have bigger plants. I want to have more blooms. So I don't want to repot. I'm going to repot it, but I'm not going to divide it. When you divide something, you should keep it like this Cattleya. I've got some at home too. I've got new growth here, new growth here. Not much inside. And it's just starting to grow on the outside or on this clay pot. I will pot just this part inside and center it more or bring it over more in a new pot. If you can't repot because it's grown onto the pot, you don't want to ruin the roots because it's a setback, especially for Cattleyas. You can just put it in the same, take it in this pot, put it inside a bigger pot and add medium around it. is what a lot of people will do. Or they will let it grow, put another pot next to it, let it walk right into that pot, and then you can cut it off.
But don't do like I did. I couldn't understand why my dressing only was not blooming. Did you know that Dingbat had put it in 3 different pots? No wonder the poor thing couldn't bloom. I kept pulling my pot.
Does everybody, you all have gotten a ticket? Because it's been an hour and a half. I don't want y'all falling asleep anymore. We can get this out here. And
We
Laura,
appreciate you coming, and we hope that you will want to come and join us in our meetings in the Cape Fear Orchid Society. Come and visit with us.
Christine, you want to grab?
And see what we're all
Did you
about.
guys get one? No. You guys
It's
get
on our
one?
guest stick. All right, this is gonna be happy with me.
All right, the ticket is last 3 digits, 623. All right. 623. Now, this is what, and the reason why I got this one here is so you would have a longer time to enjoy it. I actually, at the store, I took it out of the pot. If it's in a plastic sleeve, I take them out of there and take a look to see what the roots look like. The roots looked okay on this. The moss looks like it's good.
It's only got one drain. It's got a drain spot.
Huh?
Got a drain.
Oh, yeah, it's only got one drainage hole in the bottom, but, and I've got a leaf that's beginning to yellow over here. Don't worry about that, just let it go ahead and yellow. And then you can, cut it off when it gets to be too bad. You should have a good another year in this. These are all growing, they should be fine, and you should be,
Thank you.